What is going on, sports card feeds? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day, and today we are here with a video on stock up and stock down for the Usmnt, going back through the game versus El Salvador that we had last night, the first game of the octagonal that we are diving into. So, wasn't the best result. In case you haven't seen, we did draw 0-0, 0-0, so not great, not exactly what you're looking for. As far as the game went, I think there were a lot of things to take out of it in terms of both card perspective, but also just player perspective going forward and what we could expect to see. So wanted to break that down today, and we'll do this after every USMNT game, going through players that I feel like have gotten a bump and players that I feel like in my mind have gotten a significant bump back as well. And we could also even talk about coaches like we will in this episode. So that is the plan. Let's go ahead and get on into the stock up. So the first one on stock up for me is Gio Reyna. I thought he had a pretty good game given the circumstances. He was the most standout of the attackers in my opinion. Also, sort of playing out of position. A lot of people in the USMNT crowd are clamoring for him to be a central midfielder, where I think he would have performed pretty well in this type of game. However, because of our lack of just fundamentally, star players up top and missing Pulisic and not having a solidified 9, I think Greg wanted to get Reyna up there to just maybe get more out of the team. Whenever you're watching Gio, I feel like I just have so much comfort and confidence when he's on the ball that you just feel very safe. He also is one of the few players that were creating a good amount of chances, and his set pieces last night were just amazing, as they usually are. So I was very impressed overall. He did have some sort of errors here or there, and maybe times where he's just holding the ball a bit too much, but that's always kind of been the complaint. I'd rather have a player that's a little too confident in himself rather than someone that isn't, so I think it's a fair trade-off. And then for the center back pairing of Miles Robinson and Tim Ream, I thought it was pretty good considering what we knew going in. I mean, Miles Robinson's really never started for us consistently, neither is Tim Ream. I mean, it's been more so lately, but he's not in theory our starter going forward for the future. So, I mean, kind of playing with backups here in a sense, and I think that they performed pretty well overall. There weren't a lot of glaring errors on the defensive end, and even in build-up play when they were getting pressured, I felt like they did a pretty good job at just flowing the ball around and being able to stay pretty safe back there, considering our midfield just looked like an utter disaster at the same time. So to have that type of confidence in the back, I felt pretty good about it. And then the final stock up is going to be Conrad de la Fuente. I thought he did pretty good. It is sort of weird to have two stock ups in the attack in a game where you have 0 goals, but I feel like, again, it was more of a midfield thing. We never really had control of the game in the midfield, and if you don't have that, it is hard to then control the game up top. So I thought that Conrad offered a lot. He was one of the few players that actually could go out wide and really start to create something on that end. You saw a lot of what you can see for him at Marseille, where he just feels really comfortable, both in the build-up and maybe even building back and just swinging the ball back around with us. He keeps defenders on their heels, always on skates. You could just tell that, they never really know what to do about him. He's sort of a problem, but at the same time, didn't really have too many chances. He did have some good feeds into the box, so I thought that was really nice as well to be able to offer up a little bit of something. Of course, people always, argue, well, why are you feeding the box when Sargent's our striker? Never really there, and that's a decent question to be had, but at the same time, I thought that he did pretty good overall. I also was impressed by his defensive work, because that's something that's always been critiqued with him, is that he doesn't offer as much on the defensive end, but I think he's been getting better at that, and you could tell that he and Dest were oftentimes pretty close together and doing a good job at being able to stop whatever sort of attacks were coming on the other end, so I was impressed. Speaking of Serginho Dest, that is going to be the first stock down, and that is because, when you're a right back for Barcelona and you're beating out people like Emerson and they got to get chipped away, and Barca believes in you that much, and from what I've seen, I believe in you that much, and then you come out in El Salvador and you look like you did last night, it's got to be a stock down for me. I also saw this in the Honduras game as well, where it just gets really physical, and I don't know. That is kind of the thing. We'll get into the potential excuses you could make later, and I'll throw those out there. I didn't want to start the video with that, kind of bad vibes, but I mean, it's really, really physical. So when you're going from something like La Liga, where, any sort of hit is just a foul, and then you can kind of get away with it, and you don't really have to be physical, and you can play out on the wing and do kind of your own thing, it's a lot different than this sort of situation where your team's getting pressed, you're getting beaten up, it's a lot different. And even when he was trying to beat people out of the back in defense, whenever he was trying to just make space and make something happen, even then he would often get bodied, and whether or not it's a foul, you could debate it, but at the end of the day, it's what's going to happen here. And given that that's the case, you have to be prepared for it. And so I look forward to seeing how he'll adapt to the CONCACAF style, but it hasn't gotten off to a hot start. So with Dest, I wasn't impressed with his ability to beat defenders, and on top of that, really didn't offer a ton in attack and often wants to cut inside, which kind of pairing him up with the wingers that we do typically doesn't make a lot of sense. And so it's been kind of rough. Next up on the stock down is going to be Matt Turner. However, I mean, it's not really that much of a stock down. Honestly, it's something we've known. He didn't really look very comfortable with his feet. You could always tell whenever people wanted to maybe play it back to Matt Turner and cycle it around in possession, they might have a second thought about it. They might not even go to him in the first place. So that tells me that the team doesn't believe in that aspect as much. And whenever he would get the ball at his feet, we did see one time where he just played it out of bounds essentially for a corner, which you never like to see that. Although we did see that with Stefan before as well. But in games like this going forward, in games that we think we're going to dominate more so in possession, I think even in this game we didn't dominate as much as we'd like to. But if you feel like the other team isn't going to have that much of chances on goal, then you're going to have to throw in Zach Stefan so that you can get more out of the team going forward and be more fluid in that regard. So again, kind of something we already knew, but even more solidified at this point. And then beyond that, I think the most glaring issue was the Brenden Aaronson, Weston McKennie pairing in midfield. I thought Tyler Adams did really good, but at the end of the day, when you're relying on Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie for your build-up play, I think that's going to be a little bit rough because Brenden Aaronson really didn't offer much in that regard. I've talked about that before, but I think he just, like Dest, he gets bodied, especially in a midfield role. I just don't think he's built for that yet, especially on the road in CONCACAF. He's just going to get demolished, and so it would have been better to throw him up on a wing where maybe you get him in some more space and allow him to create rather than being that presence in midfield that has to both be solid, be safe with the ball, but then also moving forward. I just don't think it really fit him that well, and hopefully Greg learns from this. I don't think we'll need to play him in midfield anymore, and we'll see how that works out. In theory, I think he's better at being a backup winger, and I would have rather have had Reyna be dragged into that midfield instead, and maybe swap those two out. But again, Weston's good unless you're asking a ton out of him. He can be that defender, he can be the attacker, but he cannot be everything. He cannot be the presence in midfield that you need to be solid, and then also a defender, and then also someone that's bombing up the field and getting attacks. It's just too much for him to do. So if you're going to, have Adams sit back, and then you're going to ask Weston to do everything, and then Brenden Aaronson's over there and really can't get much going at all, it's going to be a tough time. So I think going forward, Greg will work with that, and if he doesn't, then that is on Greg, because if I don't think we're going to, but if we see Brenden Aaronson in the midfield more going forward, and it doesn't get better, that's on Greg. Again, I just can't say it enough. I feel like Gio Reyna would be built for that midfield role. He's so physical. He's great at attacking. You're not going to get the ball off him. His first touch is amazing. And so to be able to have a presence like that in midfield is what is so important, especially in the style of system that Berhalter wants to have that's possession-based and that can be very fluid. You cannot have a no-show in Brenden Aaronson paired up with Weston McKennie, who you're asking to do everything. It's just impossible. So you're going to have to bring Reyna back there, or maybe in the future, if Yunus Musa is actually fit and ready to go, he could also play in that role as well. I think he would work really good as a Brenden Aaronson replacement in that sort of system, but again, we need someone else there. So that leads me to the final stock down, and that is Greg Berhalter. As you do, if you win, people like the coach. If you lose, people don't like the coach. Typically how it goes. This feels like a loss for us because we have such immense talent at this point. We feel like we should be able to do better than that. And honestly, I think we did pretty good. I don't think we did as good as we could have done. There were a couple glaring headers that maybe should have been a goal. Miles Robinson early on and then Weston McKennie later. We had a lot of chances that, maybe should have been goals. But at the end of the day, they weren't. And that comes back to Greg Berhalter, especially when we didn't dominate the game in any sense. We had more of the clear-cut chances by a long shot, but we didn't dominate the game from a physical or possession-based standpoint. So that is concerning, especially when, this is El Salvador that we're talking about. Obviously, it's an away CONCACAF game. You can't take that lightly, but, we have bigger hopes and aspirations than beating El Salvador on the road. So given that, we have to be better. We have to get better. And I think Greg cannot go and keep playing people out of position like he has been. Playing Dest at left back, like we've seen, hasn't really been great for him. Then playing Reyna up at right wing when he probably should be at center mid, another glaring error. Brendan Aronson probably should have been playing as a winger and not a central mid, another error. And just, you know, whenever you're trying to get this sort of system that's very possession based, very based on knowing what's going on around you and being able to feel comfortable and safe in a system, you're not going to get that when you play people out of position. You have constant changing in all these different locations. And, you know, to an extent that has to happen with soccer, and with injuries and with people not being able to show for certain reasons. You know, you do what you got to do. But beyond that, once the players are there, you have to do the best with what you got. And I don't think that we got that today. So that is going to be it as far as the stock up, stock down. I will say that in terms of excuses that you could potentially make, you know, just be sure. This is the first game that a lot of these kids, and I'll say kids because they're 18 to 22 years old, that they're going on the road in CONCACAF. They're learning. This is a learning experience. At least the first game was. I don't want World Cup qualifying cycle to be that. I want to keep that to the very beginning, learn from it, get better, and then we go from there. But, I mean, like, it's so physical. The weather is tough. The field is tough. The crowd is tough. The lack of VAR. There's a ton of different things that can go against you in this type of scenario. And so this is really the first time that they're experiencing that. And they'll get a taste of what is to come. You know, like Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And that's exactly what happens. So, you know, we learn from it. At the end of the day, and qualifying cycles past, the goal would be to draw on the road and win at home. And if you do that, you qualify really easily. So, given that, you know, in the past, this wouldn't have been such a detrimental result. However, it feels like that now. And personally, I'm not satisfied with the draw, but I do understand that, you know, the World Cup qualifying cycle is not going to go the exact way that we planned it to, or the exact way that we hope. And from there, you just got to build and learn. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Also, any stock up, stock down you'd like to let me know about, would love to hear it down below in a comment. And on top of that, if you want to see more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. And with that said, hopefully have a wonderful day, and peace.